Reeling in unwanted traffic. This is about what we see as a vast amount of attack traffic. We operate a sensor network and we observe all kinds of attacks. And we started this sensor network to do one thing, to build a defense ecosystem for sensor networks. And one of the things we've realized is that there really is a lot of attack traffic out there. So I want to talk to you about what that traffic looks like and have a conversation about whether there's something we do as people who operate networks to do something about it without breaking the internet, without setting up great big IP block lists. Is there something that we can do to address this at the source? So this talk is going to have four parts. One, something about why do we all care? I think that we do all care at some level. Some perspectives on just how much attack traffic there is out there. And this talk kind of is a follow-on to a talk that was given at RIPE 83 by George Michelson. George is a research scientist for AP-NIC, Asia Pacific Network RIR. And he set up something to help networks in his region find out when there's bad traffic coming from their networks and doing something about it. There will be a section talking about what does bad look like. And then finally, I want to engage in some discussion about what acceptable levels of bad traffic might be, and maybe thoughts on how to get there in terms of getting rid of it or reducing it. So why do we all care? How many of you remember October 21st, 2016, the attack on Dine? I see a lot of hands raised. And why are there so many regulators around the world talking about maybe making laws against default passwords? It's not all about attackers trying to conscript devices to be in the world's largest botnet. There's a lot of traffic like that. Botnets to be used for DDoS attacks, or botnets to be used while they're waiting for whatever malicious purpose to do cryptocurrency mining. But these actors that are doing this are hitting all kinds of devices all over the globe, and sometimes they want to conscript it into their botnet. Sometimes they just want to get a foothold in the network. Once they get in, then they can start moving around and escalating their attacks within people's networks. So why do we, GCA, care? GCA, we're the Global Cyber Alliance. It's a not-for-profit. This is the third not-for-profit I've worked for. I worked for ISOC. I think I spoke here when I worked for Diamond Key Security about an open source HSM a few years ago. We're a not-for-profit dedicated to reducing cyber risk. And we're global. We have offices in New York, in London, in Brussels, and we've just incorporated in Singapore. And I'm going to talk to you about one of our projects called the AID project. It's a global honey farm with hundreds of sensors. We've been running this for about 4 years, I think 4.5 years probably. We've got a lot of data. And we have other cool projects, but I'm not going to be talking about them today. So, the automated IoT defense ecosystem. This is a platform that at this point in time collects and analyzes attacks on IoT devices. We set out to build this thinking that we could build a system that would help people protect their IoT devices or their networks that had IoT devices from attacks. We're still working on that, but this particular part of it is going to look at the data that we see and talk about whether there is something that network operators might be able to do to help reduce or constrain on that. We thought it would be a mechanism for all kinds of people to use, whether they're operating a network, whether they're manufacturing equipment, whether they're researchers, regulators. Our focus from the talk today is really on people who operate networks and attack traffic coming from them. There are 3 components to this. We have this honey farm. It's about 200 sensors distributed worldwide that's collecting data that's, it makes we make ourselves look like, open IoT devices, and we invite people to attack us. We have a second component called ProxyPot, and this is our own. We have developed some proprietary technology that allows us to capture attack traffic either to a real or an emulated device. We use this, the data that I'm going to show you, I don't think incorporates any data that we've collected from that, but we're in the process of figuring out how to deploy that and how to use that to capture more data about malicious activity. And finally, we have a data visualization and analysis platform based on OpenSearch. We have a lot of data, really a lot of data. And we've talked to people who do research on attack traffic, and they say, wow, that's a lot of data. So I think if you have big data sets, it's probably not a lot of data. But in the realm of people who have collected data about attacks, we have a lot. So what's our honey farm? We have hundreds of identical sensors based on Cowrie. Cowrie is an open source IoT honey farm or honeynet, honeypot. We emulate Unix systems that are found commonly in various IoT devices. It basically looks at traffic over Telnet and SSH. That's where these attacks are coming from. And we detect all sorts of things about these attacks. We basically keep a copy of the attack that happened. We have data about the peers, which are the attackers, data about the hosts, which are our sensors, IP and port address, credentials, commands, malware files that are downloaded, URLs that they try to direct us to. From the IP addresses that we capture, we use MaxMind to do geolocation and collect ASN info. And from malware hashes, that are hashes of the stuff that's downloaded, we get malware information using VirusTotal. So we've been operating this since September of 2018. We have two versions of it. We had Honey Farm 1, which we operated up through June of 2022. This was about 1,200 sensors. It was kind of heavily weighted in Europe and the United States. And in December of 2021, we moved to a new sensor network, or we started rolling out a new sensor network. It has about 200 sensors, and there's better geographical balance. We have sensors kind of spread around the globe. So the ProxyPot Honey Farm is the other thing that we're working on. We have a proxy server that sits between a device and the internet. It does the same kinds of thing. It captures more data. We're expanding, beyond Telnet and SSH to look at more kinds of data. We typically run it on a short term, and we're in the process of setting up a physical honey farm that has about 100 real IoT devices that are behind these proxy pods. So again, most of this is going to be about the Cowrie honey farm rather than anything we do on ProxyPot. My colleague is Rufo. Rufo developed these slides, and when I get into them, we hope to use these to illustrate how big the problem is, what kind of attacks are going on out there, the things that we see. You'll notice that the slides stop at the end of March. We are still collecting data. It's just going. These slides were prepared for a talk in the spring. We knew that we were going to do this here. And the last 2 weeks, both of us were kind of sidelined, so we were unable to update them. But the data is much the same as what you see here. So this graph shows the number of attacks we detect per sensor per week. There's this big gray thing in the middle, which is over our two overlapping honey farms. We had Honey Farm 1 that ran up until the end of November, Honey Farm 2 that started in June. So that's just what the gray denotes. And so it's a little bit of an anomaly because it's different sensors. But these are the number of attacks per sensor per week that we get. So it's a lot. And when I say attack, we don't count scans. If somebody's just scanning us, we don't count pings. These are real people trying to log in to one of our honeypots. And there is a slight bit of noise. We get stuff that it doesn't really look like an attack, but we're not sure if it is or not. So, but most of it is real legitimate attack. You go in and you can see, they're hitting us with credentials that are commonly known credentials, which is why we set it up so that it'll accept those and then come in, and then we can see what we do. So these are mostly real attacks. Here's another way of looking at it. Some players just don't quit. The top 5 lines all represent the same IP address, and they've been hitting our sensors continuously since September of 2018. So this is a graph showing different IP addresses over time and you know, when they show up. There's a lot of movement in these, but there are some that are out there and they just don't give up. So, and when my boss was doing this, initially she said, you know, I want to depict you know, attacks coming from geography, and she was preparing this in March, and she was thinking about attacks, and for some reason Russia came to mind. This isn't really about how things changed from before the invasion of the Ukraine till after the invasion of the Ukraine. This is just to illustrate that attacks kind of come from everywhere and go to everywhere. You know, we singled out Russia just to show, you know, where attacks are going from Russia, they're going all over the globe, and where attacks are going to Russia, because we have sensors in Russia, and you can see that Russia is being attacked. Our sensors in Russia are being attacked from all over the globe. The yellow is from Russia outbound, the red is from the rest of the world inbound. We could do this for any country, we just happen to pick Russia. And this slide shows an attacker's global footprint. So, you know, when you get attacked, you can kind of develop a fingerprint-like thing for a particular attacker. So you can see that, you know, a whole bunch of different attacks are coming from different networks, different IPs, but you can tell that it's the same thing behind it, whether it's a machine or a person or whatever. And this shows how one attacker is distributing, you know, the source of their attacks all around the globe. There's a bunch coming from China, a bunch coming from the United States, but you can see they come from Japan and in Europe. This is kind of a close-up on Europe and this part of the world, and you can see that they've got attackers. Everywhere there's a red dot, you know, this attacker has somebody who's attacking. So some observations so far is that there's a lot of attack traffic hitting each sensor, you know, any host on our network. Some players are persistent, and it's from everywhere to everywhere. And it's not only our sensors. A couple of us have different levels of networks in our home that we do things on. I was running NTP servers, secure NTP servers for a while. You know, we have logs, and sure enough, those people who are attacking the IoT sensors are attacking my network. My boss operates a kind of a smallish, almost an ISP. And, you know, she said that she looked at her attack logs, and sure enough, all the people that are attacking our sensors are attacking her devices as well. So there's a lot of attack traffic around there. But, you know, one of the things we'd like to know is, what does bad look like? And so here are some stats. These are stats from the last 6 months, or the last 6 months before March. At this point, we were on our network that has 200 sensors distributed globally. And we saw attacks from almost 11,000 different ASs in the internet. Over 2,000 of those ASs fielded more than 1,000 attacks on our sensors. And 40 of them launched attacks from more than 1,000 distinct IP addresses. So, you know, it's kind of broad in scope in a number of different ways. And in total, we saw attacks from, you know, almost 275,000 different IP addresses on the internet. And this is all IPv4, by the way. So these are number of attacks in this period for our top 20 ASs. And the numbers at the bottom are not AS numbers. We're not really interested in doing a naming and shaming thing at Global Cyber Alliance, but, you know, if you'd like to find out if your ASs are on this list, you can talk to us and we'll tell you. But this is the one, you know, so numbers, these numbers are going to be constant across these next slides, but they'll move across the bottom. You know, we numbered them based on the highest number of attacks from the, you know, number of ASs. So the most was over 20 million attacks in that period. And the least that's on this graph, the 20th most, still launched 800,000 attacks against us over this period. So the next slide, you do the number of attackers, how many different people are doing this, or how many different sources are attacking us from these different ASs. And you'll see that the locations of the numbers on the bottom have changed, and it's quite substantial, right? So the one with the most attacks still comes in third on the number of attackers, but the one who's 144th on the list of total attacks is second on the list of the number of different attackers. And then here is activity of attackers, and what this is measuring is for an individual attacker, how many attacks per attacker do you get? And again, the numbers have changed, but again, the smallest one on the right is 18,000 attacks per attacking IP address. And the last different way of looking at this is what's the percentage of bad actors in a network? So you've got these networks that are launching attacks or that have devices in them that are launching attacks. Considering how many per IP address, it's all pretty small. It's less than 0.5%. But it varies quite a bit, right? You can see how there's variation here. So, some notes. The network IDs are not the same in every graph. The network with the most raw attack traffic didn't have the greatest number of attacking IP addresses. And the level of IP address bad behavior is small, less than 1% of the network, and highly variable. So, there's a lot of attack traffic coming from not many sources. So, what I want you to conclude, we don't think that this amount of attack traffic is right. It shouldn't be this way. We think that it's better to reduce the amount of traffic strictly than trying to prevent impact. Obviously I set up stuff to defend my network, just my home network, and I think everybody should, but we think that, it might be a better approach to try to clean it up at source if we could, rather than just, building huge IP block lists. And somebody will, people sell them. And there's only a limited amount of early detection unless we pick out clues from malware hashes. Occasionally we will see something that is big and it is brand new, but that's pretty difficult. So we think it would be better to stop it at the source, and we're pretty convinced that not all of this activity is condoned by the operator of the network that it's coming from. So here we get to the discussion, and I'm going to kind of ask some questions and open it up, and I want some feedback. What's worse? Is it the raw number of attacks coming out of an AS, and you want to reduce that? Is it the number of attacks coming from a single IP address? Is that a different kind of thing that we would like to reduce? Or is it a proportion of IP addresses acting badly? If you've got 0.5% of the IP addresses in your network that are generating this kind of traffic, do you win by getting that number cut in half? Second, what's detectable in network operations? We are not operating a network day to day, so we don't have people on our network who are sending out traffic. We operate these sensors, but it's not in its own, they're not in their own ASN. And so what's detectable? What can you as network operators detect about bad traffic coming from your network? And then what's acceptable? If you say, okay, this isn't great, we're going to try to reduce it, at what point do you say, okay, we've reduced it enough, or we've done something effectively enough? Do you use it by some of the measures we've done, or do you do it by the length of attack streaks, or something different? And then lastly, what can or should be done for stuff that is acceptable? If we say, this is too much, we want to do something about it, what can we do? And I'm not standing here with an answer to any of these questions, but what I would like to do is get dialogue started with network operators who think this is worth addressing and would like to address it. Many years ago, I worked for ISOC, and ISOC started a thing that has become Manners, which I heard somebody speak about. And that's a group of network operators getting together and saying, what can we do to improve routing security? It's in my mind that maybe something similar could be done for things like this. And if you want to know how much traffic is coming from your AS, you can see me later. So that's all I have to say. I'd like to open the floor for comments, thoughts, questions.
So I'm curious, you said you had seen like persistent IPs, right, that were attacking. Did you guys do some sort of validation of that source? Because I was thinking, well, what if it's like some legitimate business that's just doing queries to see what's out there, right? What if it's like another tool that's just emulating attacks to see what's out there? And then the second question regarding your last slide, you said, what can we do about it if it's coming from your network? Do you start restricting traffic, or do you push it down to the customers? Because I think of one time there was an event where I got a call from our telco saying, hey, we're seeing suspicious amounts of outbound calls. It looked like maybe somebody's manipulating your phone system, that kind of thing. So they pushed it down to us to fix it, right? So is that a valid step that could be taken to start contacting the customers or providing them with reports, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that, let me answer the second one. And the first one, I will say, yes, we have made some efforts, and we are pretty confident that these are malicious actors. On the second, that's why I think it's a network operator dialogue, because there are lots of different kinds of networks that are operated, right? We had a talk earlier about research and education networks. That looks quite a bit different than what Comcast, does in terms of an ISP that goes past my house. And I think for those different operators, they will have different strategies for how they might want to deal with this. And, I'm sure that we will encounter network operators who will just say, well, tell the police, right, or something like that. But, and I think that's why it's a network operator dialogue. We would like to facilitate that, but we don't have the knowledge or, anything we need to be prescriptive there. So, we'd like a network operator dialogue about that kind of thing.
I actually do have a quick question. So I'm not an expert in the domain, but so I'm just curious, is there any way you can kind of narrow down if the host or the IP address you have identified as an attacker is the actual attacker, or if someone is just using kind of like a jump host, something like this, that? Because I was kind of like, when I saw the maps, I was like, I'm not sure if we should be more careful to narrow attacks down to a certain region or something, because someone might just abuse another system to kind of attack another one. So kind of the bot network approach.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. It's really hard to answer. For a lot of these things that are running Mirai, it seems pretty obvious that it's a device that's been compromised and it's just being used directly. But if it's somebody who's trying to start something, it's quite likely that the IP address that they're hitting us from is not where they are, right? It's an exit point for something else. And a lot of our connections are with law enforcement, and they've kind of gone through with us a lot of the different strategies that big criminals use for making it look like they're somewhere else. So, but it's hard, right?
So, one question I would have is, when trying to, let's say, make the responsibility of the network operators to start filtering out DDoS attacks, there's almost a kind of maybe a big problem with dealing with like a Pandora's box situation. So at what point do you start limiting traffic? Is it based off of IP packet or like IP headers? Is it based off the actual content? How do you also start determining which is good traffic, what you may consider botnet traffic, maybe something completely innocuous or something that would be okay for the end user or for another service provider? So at what point do you say this is bad traffic, and what point do you make the network operators start blocking or filtering traffic? And then what's also going to prevent them from being forced to block traffic based off of legal or philosophical problems?
Yeah. So, our approach is not really to get regulators involved. We've done a lot of different things through working with network operators, and you know, network operators know kind of what's healthy in their own network, and it's going to vary geographically somewhat, and it's going to vary by the type of network. But we think that the operators, you know, might look at this and say, yeah, some of this is legitimately stuff we don't want coming out of our network, right? Well, can you do it? And you as a network operator may have a different plan for doing it. You know, one thing would be nice to have some best current practices on, you know, how do I detect this and how do I deal with it and how do I identify that it's, you know, bad or maybe not bad or it looks bad and needs to be investigated, or, you know, there's kind of a range of different responses that different operators would have, but you know, I think working together you can make something that's effective. So
I have a question. Sometimes the security team came to us and say, we are getting attacks from the internet. Please block IPs from Iran, North Korea, Russia, or Nigeria. I don't feel like it's a great way, but do you have any ideas or suggestion for us?
no, I don't. I agree. I don't think you can, you know, look, I block traffic coming into my network, right? And I do various things. I'm particularly sensitive about DNS, right? I don't want bad DNS to find its way onto my device. So I click on something that I'm, you know, after clicking on it, I'm in a world of hurt. But in general, I don't think that, you know, doing blocking, I mean, you do it, but I don't think that's a good way to do it. Certainly blocking entire geographies or indeed entire economies is, it seems to me to be overkill, so.
Hey Phil, thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering, have you been approached by any security vendors, firewall vendors, et cetera, for your data? Do you make that data accessible in terms of blocking botnets, or, you know, understandably that I know this is something that isn't always looked upon, you know, greatest from some people, because then, as other people were mentioning, some of those attack vectors are so-called innocent bystanders in terms of, you know, being blacklisted unknowingly because they had an insecure system. But, you know, I guess mainly my question is that any sort of data you're sharing with security vendors at this time? No,
we don't share it with security vendors. We have some contracts with people who are, you know, building networks, kind of municipal networks, and they want to know what's going on. But, you know, that's just one way we do it. We have relationships with researchers. We like finding researchers who want to analyze this data and produce interesting things. So, and we're a not-for-profit. We don't just make all this data public, but we set up arrangements with people for, you know, allowing people to inspect and analyze the data. So, but I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think any security vendors or threat intelligence vendors have approached us and said, you know, let us monetize your data. So, right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for all the questions. I thought, you know, there's 10 minutes here, you know, you sit down.
It's security. Everyone wants to talk about it. Do you have any thoughts or like times where you have interacted with an ISP-esque network on the cost of implementing stuff like this? Both, you know, the dollars and cents, and then also like latency and bandwidth that you get because you're trying to run through a firewall that may not be able to do line rate, or even, you know, there's limitations in that.
We have, yeah. So it kind of yes and no. With some of the people we've worked with, we have encountered things where they've tried to hit us faster than we could respond. You know, their demand for doing queries was faster than we could keep up with, which is just an, you know, engineer. We run all this data and the analysis of it in the cloud, so you know, we just had to adjust that. We haven't talked to a lot of ISPs. We're eager to talk to a lot more ISPs, but we've had a couple who have said, you know, you can see things that we can't, right? So, you know, our tools for inspecting traffic, you know, we're pretty diligent about trying to keep bad traffic from coming out of our network as well as into our network. But through this, you have a granularity of stuff. And You know, so that's an encouraging thing to find, but, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I think my time is up, so should I hand it off to the next speaker? Or I see somebody getting up. You can catch me later. Okay. All right, that's it.